Competitiveness and Economic Prosperity, or CICEP for short, is excited to present this new series of webinars exploring what makes innovation ecosystems work. In the series, we're looking at university partnerships with industry, with government, and with communities. We're examining these partnerships from every angle and taking a look at how partners build trust and cooperate to achieve shared goals. We'd like to thank Florida International University's Office of Engagement for helping us out with the webinar, providing the webinar platform and production support. We'd also like to say thanks to all of you who've joined us. We're so glad that you're taking some time out of your day to join the conversation. I'm Jim Waddell, your host for Social Capital. I'm Assistant Vice President for Innovation and Technology Policy at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, or APLU, and I'm also the Staff Director for the Commission on Innovation. Today's program is called Culture and Collaboration, Partnering with Entrepreneurs. We know that entrepreneurs are critical partners in university efforts to help build innovation ecosystems. Entrepreneurial culture and university culture, though, are not always the same. So how do we bridge that gap? Is it best to work with seasoned entrepreneurs and let faculty do what they know best? Or should we encourage faculty and students to develop entrepreneurial skills? What roles do we create for our partners in the private sector? And what's different about partnering with individual entrepreneurs and partnering with whole companies that are entrepreneurial? And where do we find the money for these entrepreneurial endeavors? Well, let's find out. Before I introduce my first guest, I would like to invite all of you to participate in the conversation. So you have a chat window there on your screen towards the bottom right, and to participate in the conversation, all you have to do is type in your comments or questions, and we will draw them into the conversation as we proceed. Okay, so now I'd like to go ahead and introduce my first guest. Linda Kawano is Vice President for New Business Development at Cantu Designs, a product development consulting firm specializing in leading-edge food development. Dr. Linda Kawano's experience in evaluating and commercializing new technology spans over 19 years. She's also served as Director of Northwestern University's Intellectual Property Licensing Office, and later negotiated technology acquisition agreements for Abbott Laboratories. Linda is also the founder of Group Optima, through which she provides intellectual property management and high technology business services to corporations and universities throughout the US, Canada, and Japan. Linda, I'm so glad you could join us today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for the invitation to participate in this, Jim. My passion is cross-cultural communications, working in multidisciplinary settings and teaching people how to build trust for effective business partnerships. Much of my current consulting projects involve creating and conducting workshops and training programs for clients covering areas such as working with industry, relationship building, and business communication across borders. I'd like to use a few moments here to tell you how I came to this point in my career and how it relates to the subject of our webinar today. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of working with many entrepreneurs, numerous talented and innovative people, and their innovations in many walks of life, so to speak, in the biotech, medical, and food and consumer product industries, and in numerous academic settings in both private and public institutions. I've assessed many university-based inventions and creations and negotiated several license agreements and have seen a lot of successes and failures. In many cases, the innovations that I licensed were never commercialized due to the innumerable development challenges facing very early stage technology. However, in 1992, I had the opportunity to negotiate and execute a license agreement for Northwestern University for a compound that 13 years later launched as a successful pharmaceutical Lyrica. Upon signing of the license, I had the hope that someday the invention, pregabalin, would be a successful product and treatment, but I had no crystal ball. In fact, the drug faced many hurdles in its developmental pathway, and that could very well have kept it from becoming a product. Since 1996, the year I founded my consulting business, Group Optima, I have provided tech transfer services to several U.S. and foreign universities and companies. About 8 years ago, I was approached by chef entrepreneur Homegrown Cantu to work in his then nascent design company, Cantu Designs. Chef Cantu was looking for a business partner to help with the business development aspects of his company. Homegrown Cantu can be considered the quintessential entrepreneur, at least by some definitions. A risky opportunity identifier, not afraid to fail, possessing extreme passion for his ideas and tremendous perseverance. He is a classically trained chef who loves science and has no restraints when it comes to innovation, and is known for his edible paper menu, a cooking vessel that can cook using the radiant energy of the sun, and aromatic utensils and more. This partnership has been both extremely inspiring and thought-provoking, working alongside a gifted, relentless innovator whose mission is literally to change the world, negotiating agreements with huge food conglomerates as well as edgy startup companies that are developing disruptive technologies that are changing the way people view food, and communicating with people in the entertainment, design, and art worlds. What I found most fascinating is how my experience with innovation and entrepreneurship in the tech transfer, the university tech transfer, and corporate business development and licensing settings were directly applicable to my work with Cantu Designs, and also how my experiences at Cantu Designs cross-fertilize my Group Optima consulting projects. These experiences have enabled me to see the commonalities across cultures, institutions, and businesses. That is, what comes up on both sides and applies across the board, what works well and not so well when it comes to entrepreneurial success and failure. I'm looking forward to sharing what I've experienced and learning from my fellow participants and the audience.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Linda. You mentioned quite a few things in there, and in particular, that kind of what I took away from some of the experience you described is that, we can't have success in trying to do the kinds of things that universities are trying to do in terms of driving innovation if we can't find ways to link up with entrepreneurs and also to create some entrepreneurial culture within our institutions. So I'm really looking forward to talking with you more about that today. Before I go on to our next guest, Linda, you and I were talking the other day about the idea or the question of, just what do we mean by the word entrepreneurs? And I thought that question that we were exploring the other day might be a good way to get things started today, just talking about what are some definitions we should be thinking about when it comes to entrepreneurs?
Yeah, did a little research on it, and also based on what I've experienced, there's several definitions, and some of which actually involve making money. But basically, people who are willing to take risks and change and looking at things differently than the average person. But one thing that kept coming up as a common thread in terms of definitions of entrepreneurs was opportunity. And so I like to think of an entrepreneur in a very broad sense. That is an opportunity seeker, one who exploits opportunities, sees and acts on opportunities. And then it takes away everything else, whether you are approaching it from a social entrepreneurial focus or really wishing to make money, or whatever your passion is. I think you're an entrepreneur if you see an opportunity and want to seize it and have seized it.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I would agree that frequently when I hear people talk about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, risk is a big part of what people talk about, but it's really more about opportunity. And so it's neat to see that this research that you did in looking at definitions actually does focus on the word opportunity. Well, Linda, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next guest, and we'll continue the conversation. Neal Kane is the founder and president of Illinois Partners Executive Services. He's also entrepreneur in residence at Northern Illinois University. Neal is a leading authority on technology commercialization and innovation, and was the founding CEO of Advanced Diamond Technologies, Inc., a firm he co-founded in 2003 by licensing technology from Argonne National Laboratory. Neal is the former co-executive director of the Illinois Technology Enterprise Center at Argonne, an entrepreneur in residence with Illinois Ventures at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He was founding CEO of several startup companies based on university or federal laboratory research in areas such as power electronics, photovoltaics, polymers, and medical diagnostics. Previously, Neal had been at both Microsoft and IBM. Neal, thanks a lot for being here today. Welcome.
It's my pleasure, Jim. Thank you.
So Neal, you've got quite a bit of experience yourself as an entrepreneur, and so we're really glad to have you and your perspective here today. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your experience and maybe a little bit about how your experience is working as an entrepreneur, partnering with universities, has shaped your thinking about entrepreneurship?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. The term or the title entrepreneur in residence, it turns out, is fairly ambiguous, and it means different things in different contexts. Traditionally, an EIR is somebody who gets hired by a venture capital firm, and usually it's an executive who we would say is fundable, and the mission that an EIR has is to go create a new fundable opportunity that the venture capital firm can then invest in with the EIR as the presumptive CEO of the startup company. And when I first started doing this sort of thing at the University of Illinois, they had just raised their own captive venture capital fund. And I don't know if they were literally the very first in the United States to do that, but they were unquestionably very pioneering in that regard. And so suddenly, they found themselves with a brand new research park and a motivation to want to do startup companies and money. But there were very few people in their ecosystem, if you will, in Champaign-Urbana who had any experience in actually building businesses. So I was recruited to move down to Champaign, and my job as EIR at the research park was actually to be the founding CEO of spin-off companies that were formed in partnership with professors or postdocs. So if you had sort of the classic spin-off company from the university, the venture capital firm, the captive venture capital firm, really was not very enthusiastic about funding businesses with a professor as part-time CEO. So the model typically was that I would become the founding CEO and a professor or a postdoc would comprise the founding technical team. And then that way they ensured that there was, a little bit of business experience and guidance and somebody with experience at the helm. In my role at Northern Illinois University, it's even slightly different again. My job here is more to evangelize and coach both faculty and students to try to generate more of an awareness of entrepreneurship and to get a whole new generation of people thinking in terms of the marketability and the commercial potential of their innovations.
That's interesting that, between the University of Illinois and Northern Illinois University, we're talking about two somewhat different kinds of institutions. I mean, both research institutions, but one with maybe more of a kind of regional comprehensive mission at Northern Illinois University, not quite the level of research focus as at University of Illinois. So it is interesting how the how entrepreneurship and what it is changes across these different institution types. So I was wondering if you could maybe just talk a little bit more about that. What entrepreneurship is kind of based on context.
That's exactly right. I would describe it as being situational. Across the country, different universities have different competencies. They have different strengths in different areas. They have different sizes, and what works at Stanford and MIT at Northwestern may not work for a much smaller school that's not located in a major metropolitan center. Plus, at Northern Illinois University, they don't have a graduate engineering program, and so it's not really appropriate to think of the environment here as being comparable, say, to Champaign, where you have a top 10 engineering school. So we have to shape the programs and think in terms of what works in a given environment. That's, again, both a function of the composition of the research portfolio that they have, as well as the evolution, if you will, of the entrepreneurship programs. I mean, Linda and I have both, seen the evolution of this sort of stuff at Northwestern and at the University of Chicago and in Champaign over the past 15 years, and all of those schools have very, very highly evolved, robust programs that cut across campus, where they've already effectively linked the business schools with the engineering schools. They've got mature angel programs. They've got, in some cases, venture capital funds. They've got a lot of adjunct professors who are experienced entrepreneurs. But at other schools, they're just not that far along. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to look at each environment uniquely.
Yeah, and the same is true for every entrepreneurial opportunity, right? I mean, no two startups are the same either, so it makes sense that the situation or the context in which the entrepreneurship is happening would be different as well. Well, thank you.
Well, I would add to.
Sorry,
sure.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I just was going to add to that, and perhaps this is food for thought for later. One of the things that I do encounter when we're looking at technologies that have the potential to be spun off is you really also have to address the question of whether you think that the particular technology, has the kind of potential to scale and become a very big company, which is what everybody would like to see. But you can also have a much smaller company that turns out to be a win for everybody. It may create income for the faculty members. It might have local impact. It might create a teaching opportunity for students, So I kind of reject wholeheartedly the thesis that the only thing that can be spun out are those things that the, Sand Hill Road crowd in Silicon Valley is willing to fund. Because there's a lot of ways that you can do things on a regional and on a smaller basis that still have a lot of impact locally.
That's a great point. So to bring it back to what Linda was saying earlier, the opportunity is different as well. So again, all situational, and the way we look at entrepreneurship and the opportunities around it, needs to be reflective of the context in which it's happening. So, well, thanks, Neal. I'd like to get our third guest engaged in the conversation now. And before I introduce Stephen Tello, I just want to encourage folks, if you want to join the conversation, all you have to do is type in your comments or questions into that chat box, and we will bring your questions and ideas into the conversation as well. So Stephen Tello is Associate Professor in the Manning School of Business at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and Associate Director at the university's Massachusetts Medical Device Development Center, or M2D2. These joint appointments allow Steve to combine his passion for teaching with research, examining how to best promote the commercialization of emerging technologies. Stephen co-founded the university's undergraduate concentration in entrepreneurship in 2007 and contributed to the establishment of an interdisciplinary graduate program in technological entrepreneurship. Prior to joining the Manning School of Business, he co-founded and directed the development of Lowell's online education program and was a founding member of UMass Online, the university's system-wide online education initiative. Stephen maintains an active role in support of technology integration on the campus and within the UMass system. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. I've been very much enjoying the conversation so far.
Great.
And as I was listening, I was. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. As I was listening, and I've been sharing some comments in the chat, I was thinking about the different types of entrepreneurship and the impact they have on a university. And in my new role as Associate Vice Chancellor for Entrepreneurship and Economic Development, I've had a chance to sort of look at it from both the academic perspective, as entrepreneurship as an academic discipline, but also in my medical device development group, I look at it as a technology transfer or a economic development activity. And when you and I were talking before the event, we were talking a bit about how institutions like universities have to serve many different needs, and it's sometimes a challenge serving the needs of academic entrepreneurship faculty or student startups or companies that are coming in from the Boston-Cambridge life science area. So a lot of what I do and facilitate here at the university is about building bridges and helping the MSITE program that you mentioned, which links the business and engineering schools together, was really about trying to find ways to get those students and those faculty working together on value creation, new company creation and such. And it's a model that we're using to reach out to other parts of the university. We're working with the music school, for example, or the nursing school, and having them think about problem-solving opportunities and entrepreneurship as ways of solving the problems that may concern their faculty or their students or their constituents. So it's sort of a broad brush stroke at addressing and thinking about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it sounds, and as you say, institutions are trying to serve so many different needs. Our universities really do have to kind of take a broad approach, or at least be open to many different approaches for, you know, kind of mounting entrepreneurial efforts on their own, and or in terms of partnering with entrepreneurs. Stephen, maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the challenges UMass Lowell has faced in developing its kind of what we might call entrepreneurial enterprise.
So it's interesting when you were reading my bio and you mentioned the entrepreneurship program in the business school only started in 2007. And so, I mean, I think that was a challenge. That was reflective of maybe an older culture at our university, one where we tended to be a bit more siloed than I would say we are now. Not that those walls and barriers have disappeared, but in about that time, 2006, we had a new chancellor come on board, Chancellor Meehan, brought on a new team, and we've really worked to change the culture of the university. We have a strategic plan. We spent time traveling around the country, visiting Arizona State, visiting UNC, Chapel Hill, looking at what their leaders were doing. And so we've really planted a stake in the ground and said, we're going to be an entrepreneurial university. We're going to introduce all students to entrepreneurship. So just before this, I was at a meeting with a group of faculty we do a orientation with every freshman. We get about 15 to 1,800 freshmen come to campus every summer, and we do an orientation with them about a program we started called Difference Maker, which is about entrepreneurship, but it goes about introducing it from sort of a problem-solving methodology, and it introduces problems that the students care about. And our point there is to say to these kids, listen, we know there's a lot going on. We're excited to have you here, and this is a different institution, and we're going to use the toolkit, the entrepreneurship toolkit, to solve some of these problems regardless of your major and discipline. And that has honestly been pretty well received with the student, the alumni, and the parents. And then on the other spectrum, you have maybe the technology transfer area, where I think we haven't done as good a job, where we have some very creative research faculty, but I think we've had difficulties in putting together the support and processes it takes to take a lab innovation and turn it into a commercial product. So my work with the Medical Device Center is really a very focused effort around putting in place the resources that both our own faculty need, but also spin-ins from the Boston-Cambridge life science hospitals, bringing them into a process that helps them to think about commercialization, product development, fundraising, and launching out in there. So there's this broad spectrum. And that can be hard to remind people that we're not just talking about one type of entrepreneurship. We're talking about several different types, different constituents, and even sometimes the outcomes that we want. I like Neal's comment about his recent comment about how we have to think about small opportunities as well as big opportunities. In the Medical Device Center, we've had several venture capital firms come in, and they'll say, oh, that's only a 3x return. It's not big enough for an investment, so we don't want to get involved. Well, that actually creates an opportunity for the entrepreneur to use other types of strategies for moving it forward. And we've had some pretty successful 2 or 3x ventures come out. So understanding there's this range of perspectives and interests, I guess, helps equip us to deal in different ways with the needs of the entrepreneur and the solution they're trying to move forward.
Well, that's interesting, because, you know, so I'm hearing this kind of theme emerging here about, certainly around opportunity, but also that there are differences in kind of the way an institution looks at its sort of homegrown entrepreneurial capacity, and the way it thinks about working with entrepreneurs that are outside the institution. And I think I want to ask some more about that, and then I'm going to start with a question for you, Steve. But first, I just wanted to remind folks that we'd love to have you be part of the conversation. So, please do take a minute to think about a comment or question you'd like to share with everybody, and just type it into that chat box, and we'll get you engaged in the conversation as well. But Steve, I'm going to start with you just to ask a little bit more about this idea of, kind of the homegrown entrepreneurship and the kinds of work that you're doing inside the institution to help faculty and students be more entrepreneurial, and to just create more of an entrepreneurial culture at the institution in general. It sounds like there are some opportunities, though, where it's really not entrepreneurship for UMass Lowell is not about the homegrown piece, but really about finding the right relationship with the right entrepreneur outside the institution. And I guess my question is kind of, how do you know when you want to be, how do you know what situations demand one or the other?
So how do you know whether it's time to focus on the homegrown or to
Yes.
put resources into the external? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, for us, I think we have to do both. And what I've learned in this game, so I've been at it in different capacities for a few years. There are faculty, homegrown faculty, who I worked with maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago, and we put some time into them, and those ideas just didn't move forward. But then as we started to put more resources across the institution, such as the Difference Maker program, incubator space, maker spaces, seed funds, those types of things, those same people come back. And now when they come back, they've matured a bit, their thinking has changed, and so now they're ready to move forward. So we've seen growth in people over the course of 4 or 5 years to the point where it's going to be clearly more successful. In terms of the sort of external audience, what I've learned is that they come to us, initially they may come to us because they want access to a particular research or a lab, or they want access to a facility. But they learn that by working with the university, there are a range of resources. So whether it's graduate student talent, or researchers, or access to alumni capital, that if they work with us, that it can be a richer experience. And in fact, that's what the university looks for. We don't take a financial interest in external companies, but we hope that they're bringing something to the table that sort of enriches our work. So if they hire our graduate students as intern, that's a check mark in the plus column. If they are successful and it helps us to gain recognition, that's a check mark in my plus column.
Great. Great. That helps kind of sort of paint a picture of both the kind of differences and the overlaps between this sort of a homegrown entrepreneurship activity versus the real partnering that our institutions might do with entrepreneurs outside the institution. We are getting some questions, and I want to get to those in just a second. First, I wanted to go back, though, Linda, to this idea about defining entrepreneurship. And we talked about risk-taking versus opportunity, and Neal's made a comment here in the chat window about entrepreneurs really being masters of mitigating risk. And so while we like to say that the entrepreneurs are about opportunity, and those are great definitions that you found, there is some level of risk-taking, it seems to me, that entrepreneurs have to be ready for and have to bring to the table. And I'm wondering if risk-taking is a place that is actually, is that a place of match between entrepreneurs and universities? Or are universities less likely to be in a position where they want to be risk-taking? And I guess just from your experience, Linda, what would you say in terms of the idea of risk-taking as a cultural element?
Well, if you think of the traditional role of the university, it is a risk-taker in terms of academics and thinking out of the box. And look how many times universities are consulted on at various levels of thinking out of the box and for the future. So from an academic standpoint, I think universities are risk takers. From a business standpoint, perhaps not as much, but that's really more not so much culture, but I think infrastructure, how they're set up. And you know, universities have, it's not really that long that universities have been working in the, well, business space, I guess you might call it technology transfer space. And so they've learned quite a bit in the years I've been doing. I've seen quite a bit of differences, and I've evolved, and I've actually kind of changed my view about what the role I think of the university and what it can really do to move things forward. One thing about universities, they have wonderfully talented people, students that are thinking in very creative ways, and faculty. Some faculty don't wish to get involved at all in any kind of technology transfer, business, don't want, but maybe they're innovative and inventing, and maybe their role is more as an innovator, but not necessarily an entrepreneur if you add risk into that. So individually there's different elements of risk. I think the younger people are riskier. In fact, younger people, undergraduates, are leaving the university in certain situations to start up their own business. I think that's sort of risky in terms of going against what their parents wanted them to do, what is the norm of getting a college degree. So I think if we think about these as things to build upon, we can really have, universities can be in a very good position to train people in the elements, the tools that will make people successful if they choose to be a business entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Neal, I'm curious about your perspective on the same idea that, you know, that risk-taking may be a place where entrepreneurs and universities do or don't match up or can work around. And, you know, you made that comment about entrepreneurs being masters of mitigating risk. So, again, just the same thing is, from your experience, how does that play out in universities partnering with entrepreneurs? Who takes the risks, and is there some agreement about what risk-taking is and how much of it is worth it?
Yeah, it's actually a difficult question to answer, because I don't completely agree with the central premise, which is that, you know, entrepreneurs are risk takers. I think, as I said, you know, entrepreneurs are really good at managing risk. And furthermore, I don't know of any career today that isn't, you know, risky on some level, right? I mean, if a young person makes a decision to go to law school or medical school, or they enter the workforce, you know, there's risk there too, and nothing is guaranteed to them, not to mention the considerable financial risk that they're taking as well. So I really don't dwell on the risk question. I would say, though, that you know, in my experience, these businesses get formed at the university level either by students who have nothing to lose, or professors who may, you know, their downside is a considerable amount of time that they invest in them. And then for people like me, where I think of myself as almost like a mercenary, or somebody who's occasionally brought in on an opportunity to say, hey, you know, here's a appealing technology, we think it has some potential, and we need somebody who knows how to move this thing forward. You know, quite frankly, a decision that's occasionally laying at my feet is the one of, well, if you want me to get involved in that, how am I going to get compensated, or how will the entrepreneur get compensated? You know, and then there's a question of whether that person just has the capability and willingness to invest a considerable amount of their own time, or whether there's a different model where they can be subsidized or, you know, compensated somehow from the university, or from a grant, or from an entrepreneurship center, or what have you. So I'm failing to give you really a concise answer to that question. The finer point that I do want to put on this, though, is that I've seen these situations across many different universities. And the one thing that I do think is quite profound is that it is the entrepreneur, whoever that is, whether it's a postdoc, an undergrad, the professor, an industry veteran, whoever that person is, they become the nucleus around which the entity gets formed. They're the person who makes things happen. So I also think that whereas a tech transfer office can try to identify opportunities, they could try to publicize the ones that they think are good. What's needed is the person, and it's an individual, male or female, but somebody's got to be the ringleader who makes it happen. And to me, that's the role of the entrepreneur in this. And so I think of the definition of the entrepreneur less about the risk dimension, but more about the person who is able to get things done. Because another definition of entrepreneurship is somebody who makes things happen with scarce resources. I think that's what Fast Company's definition was. So I'll turn the mic back over to you, but to me it's just really about who's got the capacity to get things done.
Yeah, well, I think that's another great dimension to our definition of entrepreneurs, and getting things done, and to some extent that also means kind of being a good catalyst. Just the capacity not just to get things done, but just to make sure that resources can fall in line in order to make that happen. And sometimes at universities, sometimes that is tricky. I think it is interesting to think about, what are the qualities of an entrepreneur, and when are those qualities things that we have at our universities versus when are they things that we really need to tap outside resources for and partnering for. And I think the big point that I take away from what you're saying, Neal, is that it's not so much about what an entrepreneur is and what kinds of capacities we have at our universities. It's basically about do we have the person, the right people with the right kinds of qualities and capabilities to make it happen. It doesn't even matter so much whether or not the university structure works or other things that are part of the context. It's really about the person.
Right. Well, let me give you also a partial. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Jim, can you hear me? Yeah, I'm in partially addressing the question that was posed by Appalachian State University about how to manage IP. I would just add to the discussion that we were just having, and I'll use myself as an example. If somebody brings me into an opportunity and they expect me to invest my own time in helping to shepherd this thing forward, then obviously I'm going to expect a much bigger piece of the pie of the founding company than I would if somebody were compensating me for my time while we were going through that early stage evaluation of the potential.
Right. And the answer then to the Appalachian State folks is really it depends, right?
Well, yeah, we don't. I could talk for the balance of the time, and I still wouldn't get through answering their question. I've been very vocal about this, and even at the NSET conference a couple of months ago in Washington, I asked the question whether anybody had any best practices or models for how you do this, and nobody has one. So it's very situational, and I'd be happy to talk to whoever posed that question offline. But the bottom line is, the founding team needs to have equity. They need to be invested in the future of the opportunity. The university needs to have some equity. But exactly where you draw those lines and how the pie is allocated is a very, very complex topic.
We'll have to do another webinar on it, and maybe
I know. I think that would be very productive, and I think you'd find that quite a lot of people are interested in it, because it's kind of like that same topic of how VCs value companies. It's a mystical, ambiguous process that everybody wants to learn more about.
Right. There's this other conversation that's going on in our chat box here, where Austin has brought up some questions about kind of the changing dynamics around some of this, given the different roles that government, education, government in our higher ed institutions play, and industry plays. And Austin also brought up the example of, for example, universities working in the space of data analytics and working with industry partners around that. And I see that Steve has started to respond to some of Austin's question here. So Steve, maybe you can expand a little bit on your response in terms of the question about where we see entrepreneurs working with universities for things like data analytics or similar kinds of academic programs that are very much kind of on the vanguard in terms of the entrepreneurial space as well.
I'd be happy to, Jim. I mean, we're fortunate, first of all, in Massachusetts, we really have some wonderful industry sectors to work with. And particularly in regards to data analytics, there's a great partnership between the states, the state government, the private and public universities, and a number of the major private companies that are interested in developing a high-performance green computing center. So the state's ponied up, the partners have each brought something to the table, and there's a model where they're basically going to build a sustainable high-performance computing resource that can then be used by industry and by university to move forward. On our campus, we have our medical device incubator has been primarily focused on supporting medical device entrepreneurs and medical device startups. But over the last year and a half, we've started to attract the attention of some major corporations like Boston Scientific, Smith & Nephew, Covidien, and what we're finding is they're pushing innovation outside of the company. So it's basically this open innovation model now where they're coming to the university and they're saying to us, how can we get access to these startups? How can we gain access to these researchers? And so we're trying a couple of different things. We've put together some sponsorship models with these companies where they can sponsor events or they can sponsor startups through events, and then we'll use our sort of our support model to bring them to a certain stage where the company can then make a decision about whether they actually want to acquire the startup. We also have a major partnership negotiation going on with a major defense firm right now where we built a new 80,000 square foot, $85 million technology research center. And this defense company is basically going to take one floor. It'll be a secure facility on the floor where they'll be doing some work with our researchers, and they're going to make a significant financial commitment to that floor. The state's also going to make a commitment to that. So we've been looking at different sectors and how we can partner with them to maybe help both take some of what we're learning about creating companies and share that, but also take some of the research and link that directly into certain companies and industries.
That's great, Steve. I'm wondering if either Neal or Linda are familiar with other models in which ways universities are working kind of on some of these leading edge technologies in terms of both developing academic programs as well as doing entrepreneurial kinds of activities.
Comes to mind specifically, but I think for me, where that works is when the university has developed a very good relationship with their local industrial community. And I think it's well, there are many ways to do that, but it's difficult for a company to drop in out of the blue and start building a relationship. I think universities can do well to focus on what their local community has in offering, in the offering of industrial partners, and work on those, as well as geographic locations. Sometimes identify projects that are very suitable for both entities.
That's a great point. And I also, I'm noticing that Stephen and Austin are sharing links with us. Before we go on in the conversation, I wanted to make a quick request, actually, which is, Neal, I promised you earlier this week that I was going to make sure that in our slides here I would have clear information about how folks could follow up with you. And of course, I'm now realizing that I never did that. And so, but what I'm also realizing from what Stephen and Austin are doing is that, you, Neal, you, Stephen, and you, Linda, please feel free to use that chat window as a place to type in your email address if you welcome folks following up with you directly that way, and or any URLs that you want people to have. Please just use the chat window there. The other thing is that we will send out to everybody who's been registered, who's registered for the webinar today. We'll send out an email with links and email addresses and things like that, so that you have that information that way as well. So thank you for being so innovative, Stephen and Austin, and helping us realize we could use the chat window to share those resources. I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit and talk, we had a conversation again the other day where we were talking about kind of what's the home of entrepreneurship at a university, where is the right place for it to live, and is it tech transfer? Is it the tech transfer office that should really be kind of leading the charge for the entrepreneurial enterprise, or is it the business school, or is it somewhere else? And I guess I'd like to start with you, Stephen, because you're in a role which really has to think about where entrepreneurship lives at UMass Lowell, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on does it have a home, or an appropriate home, or where should it be coming from at universities?
So it's an interesting question, and I know we had talked about it earlier, and as I was thinking about it, so the first response is, well, in many respects, it'll depend on the university, and it'll depend on the history and culture of that university and what type of university it is. That said, when thinking about the home, one challenge, oftentimes entrepreneurship is in the business school. Sometimes the challenge when it's in the business school is it can become an academic exercise or a research exercise. We had an issue, I think, where our undergraduate entrepreneurship program was relatively small, about 80 students, and I wanted greater reach than that. So when my new position was created, and I stepped into a university-wide role, we developed a program that reaches out to students in sociology and fine arts and music and engineering. So it's hard to have university-wide reach when the program is anchored in a particular college or discipline. Tech transfer, they often have other deliverables. If they focus only on entrepreneurship and startups, it may be a long time before they have metrics to report to the president and the trustees. So there are demands on them around licensing and marketing projects, and so there's a real cost to building that out. I think right now it's interesting. So my seat, I've actually recently moved my office over next to the engineering school because I have lots of contacts in business. I can pull them in anytime. Now I'm next to engineering, and I'm helping engineering to connect with the business and such. So there are a couple of different ways to think about it. I think it ultimately, to be successful and to reach across an institution, it has to be a high-level position with funding and reach.
That's a great point. And I think you also mentioned the other day that, anchoring it in, say, the business school, it is looked at strictly as an academic discipline, and often it's looked at as, trying to understand entrepreneurship and how it works, and not so much necessarily on making it work there at the institution. And so I think that point about it being in a place where it has broad reach across the institution is so important.
If I could follow up on that, Jim, too. One of the things we did when we decided we're going institution-wide, we want to reach many disciplines, is very quickly we found out we had to be careful using the word entrepreneurship and entrepreneur, because students in sociology and philosophy and community music did not think about themselves in that way. And when I was corrected by several students, and they say, one of them was a sociology major, he said, well, I'm not an entrepreneur. And I looked at him and I chuckled, because I was actually a sociology major as an undergrad decades ago. But what we did is we focused on problem solving, and having students focus on solving a problem, investigating the opportunity associated with solving the problem, developing a solution, and then finding the resources needed to move it forward. Now, frankly, that's what an entrepreneur does. But the model, using a model like that, toning down some of the business entrepreneurship language, allowed us to reach into these disciplines that might not typically think of themselves as entrepreneurs.
Oh, great. You know, that's so I think that's another, I mean, you know, it is interesting to just continue to think about, you know, who at the university has a role in this. And I think you're in a great position, Stephen, to kind of look across the institution and engage people. And I think it's great what UMass Lowell has done in terms of really establishing that high-level role that can really focus on that for the institution. You know, Linda, I'm kind of curious about your perspective on this because I know that you've worked in tech transfer offices, and you know what I'm curious in particular what your thoughts are about the tech transfer role in all of this. You know, as Stephen says, tech transfer has a lot of other things to worry about, but should our tech transfer offices also be trying to figure out what their role is in developing entrepreneurship?
You're the bridge. You're the connector. You're the one who's bringing it all together. And that's, I think, what's really needed in any situation. And somebody to go look from up, down, don't use words, and try to figure out what it is that each of these entities across campus have to offer with regard to entrepreneurship or business, really. And I think the Tech Transfer Office has a lot of, there's a lot of experience there with regard to working with business. And there's also specific knowledge about a very key element of any, well, most entrepreneurial endeavors, and that's intellectual property. And I see, yes, indeed, the Technology Transfer Office is saddled with a lot of other responsibilities, but perhaps one could think of them as mentors at some level, and perhaps there could be a program of some sort that a Technology Transfer Office or the university puts in place to match up students and other people who are maybe not even disclosing inventions to that office, matching them up as mentors or teaching, and to one extent, teaching intellectual property, if nothing else. They're the only probably entity on campus that really understands that. And maybe that could be a small focus, or a larger focus could be helping students and otherwise budding entrepreneurs learn the business of building a business off of very early stage technology.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, you know, I think it helps our tech transfer offices think differently, too, about their role, which I think is so critical as kind of the shape of innovation ecosystems kind of changes. You know, it's different now than it was, you know, 30 years ago when we started doing tech transfer at universities. So playing the entrepreneurial role can, I think, be really helpful. Before we close, I do want to get to Shailin Jyotishi's question. If I didn't get to it, Shailin would give me a hard time when he shows up here at APLU in a couple of weeks, because Shailin's going to be an intern here this summer, and we're looking forward to having him here. And Shailin was asking about, you know, we've talked about developing entrepreneurship among faculty and students. What about getting other folks from the university engaged, including people like our trustees and our alumni, in the sort of entrepreneurial enterprise at the institution? And Stephen mentioned that at UMass Lowell, a lot of alumni get involved by financially supporting some of these entrepreneurial efforts. Are there other ways that alumni can get involved? And I guess I'll start with you, Neal. You've been at both University of Illinois and Northern Illinois University now. Are you seeing other folks getting involved, including alumni, in the entrepreneurial enterprise? Did we lose you, Neal? Okay. Well, I'll go to Steve then. Stephen, you know, you were mentioning that alumni get involved as funders for entrepreneurship. Are there other ways that you're engaging alumni and/or others in entrepreneurial activity?
We have very extensive industry and alumni advisory boards, and we have a board called the Riverhawk board. That's our mascot, And those alumni have really, I would say in many respects, were the impetus for some of our incubation services. They helped us to think about creating an alumni venture fund. And they also help us review technology. So they'll sit on boards where researchers will bring in a technology and they'll do a little pitch. And the alumni, I mean, we have a number of very successful business, science, and engineering alumni, and they love to be involved in these types of things. So they can not only help advise us on things we might think about investing more in, but they'll also serve to help make the contacts that we might need to investigate a new technology further. The other thing we do with them is the Difference Maker program, which is a student-focused program, has a big event, an idea challenge, and we gave away $35,000 to students a couple of weeks ago. It was all judged by alumni. One day we had 6 rooms of judging going on for 3 hours with 25 alumni on campus divided up amongst the rooms. And they really connect with the students. They spend time afterwards talking to them. They may mentor them. We're in the process of building a mentor program where we can connect them directly. So there's a lot of exciting things that alumni can assist with.
Well, that's great. It sounds like there are lots of ways to engage alumni, and it certainly seems to make sense. My experience, or just kind of talking with folks at universities, is that alumni love to stay engaged in their universities, and sometimes they do that through sports, and sometimes they do it through getting involved in developing academic programs. But there are so many young entrepreneurs now, and it's a great way to reconnect them to the institution. So thanks for asking that question, Shaylin. And we're out of time, so I want to just say thank you very much to our guests, Linda and Stephen and Neal. I really appreciate your time today. And I want to thank all of you for participating in our webinar today. We hope that you'll be able to join us for our next webinar, which I think we have a slide about the next webinar. There we go. Our next webinar is on Thursday, June 19th, same time, 2 to 3 Eastern. We're going to be talking about convening the conveners and how universities can work with economic development organizations to help realize regional goals for economic growth. And I think that will be a real interesting conversation. And in the meantime, you can get in touch with us here at APLU and learn more about our Commission on Innovation by going to these links or being in touch with me via email. As I mentioned, our guests are also reachable, and they have been busy typing in their URLs into the chat window. And as I mentioned, we will send out an email follow-up to everybody who's registered for today's webinar with some of these links and contact information so that you can follow up with our guests. Again, thank you all for being with us. Thanks. Neal, Stephen, Linda, thanks so much for joining us. And we'll look forward to seeing all of the rest of you
thanks,
on the,
Jim.
on
thanks,
the
everyone.
next webinar.